I thought my summer internship would just be a temporary escape from city life. But when I met Evelyn, the owner of the vineyard, everything changed. What started as admiration soon became something I couldn't ignore, and neither could she. When I accepted the summer internship at Ridgewood Vineyard, I thought I knew exactly what to expect. Long hours, hands-on experience, and a quiet escape from the chaos of city life. It was supposed to be a stepping stone, a way to boost my resume before launching my career. I never expected to find her. From the moment I arrived, Evelyn, the vineyard's owner, welcomed me like family. At 61, she carried an effortless confidence, the kind that only comes from years of knowing exactly who you are. Her presence was magnetic, warm, sharp-witted, and with a passion for winemaking that seeped into every word she spoke. She walked me through the sprawling fields of grapevines, explaining the delicate balance of soil, sunlight, and patience required to create the perfect wine. I listened intently, absorbing every word, but I was also aware of something else, something deeper that I couldn't quite put into words. At first, I chalked it up to admiration. Evelyn had built something incredible, something real. It was inspiring. But as the days passed, my fascination with her only grew. One afternoon, while harvesting grapes, she worked beside me, the summer sun casting a golden glow over her skin. We took a break under the shade of an old oak tree, the scent of ripening fruit thick in the air. She handed me a cold bottle of water, watching as I took a long sip. "Do you enjoy working here?" she asked, her voice smooth and knowing. I nodded, wiping the sweat from my forehead. "Yeah, it's different, peaceful. I can see why you love it." She smiled, a flicker of nostalgia in her eyes. "This land has been my whole world for decades. I've seen it through storms, droughts, and seasons of abundance. Every year, it teaches me something new." The way she spoke, so full of reverence for her work, made me see the vineyard through her eyes. It wasn't just land, it was legacy. We continued talking, and before I knew it, I had shared more about myself than I had intended. My dreams, my uncertainty about the future, the feeling that I was always chasing something but never quite knowing what. Evelyn listened without judgment, her presence steady, her responses thoughtful. I felt understood. Over the next few weeks, our conversations became my favorite part of the day. Whether we were working in the fields, bottling wine, or sitting on the porch after a long day, I found myself drawn to her stories, to the way she viewed the world. And yet, something was shifting between us. It was subtle at first, a lingering glance, a touch that lasted just a second too long. The way my pulse quickened when she laughed, the way her presence seemed to anchor me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. One evening, after finishing the day's work, she invited me to dinner at her cottage on the vineyard. I hesitated for a moment, then agreed. I told myself it was just dinner, just another conversation like the ones we always had. But deep down, I already knew something was changing, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to stop it to be. By the time I reached Evelyn's cottage, the sun had already begun to dip behind the rolling hills of the vineyard, casting everything in a warm, golden glow. I stood at the door for a moment, exhaling slowly before knocking. This was just dinner, just another conversation, nothing more. She opened the door almost immediately, greeting me with a soft smile. The cottage smelled of rosemary and slow-roasted tomatoes, the scent wrapping around me like something familiar, something comforting. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. Inside, the space felt different from the vineyard, more personal. Shelves lined with books, a well-loved leather armchair in the corner, soft candlelight flickering against the wooden walls. This wasn't just where she lived. It was where she belonged. We ate at a small table near the window, the meal rich with flavors I couldn't quite place but savored all the same. The conversation flowed as effortlessly as it always did, but something felt different tonight. The pauses between words lasted a little longer. The air felt heavier. I was hyper-aware of everything. The way she held her wine glass, the way the candlelight reflected in her eyes, the way her voice softened when she spoke my name. After dinner, she poured us another glass of wine and led me to the porch. The night was cool, the vineyard bathed in silver moonlight, the air thick with the scent of earth and ripened fruit. I leaned back against the railing, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Then, Evelyn spoke. "I've really enjoyed having you here this summer." Her voice was quieter than usual, more careful. I turned to her, waiting. It's been a long time since I've had someone to share this with. Her words hung between us, unfinished. I felt my pulse quicken, my fingers gripping the edge of the railing. What was she saying? Or rather, what was she not saying? She turned to face me fully now, her expression unreadable, but her eyes, they told me everything. Something inside me twisted. I had spent weeks trying to push away a feeling I didn't understand, convincing myself that what I felt was just admiration, just respect. But standing there under the moonlight with her looking at me like that, I knew. And from the way her breath hitched, the way she took the smallest step closer, she knew too. She hesitated, her fingers grazing the wooden railing. It's strange, isn't it? How connections can form when you least expect them. My throat felt dry. "Yeah," I murmured. "It is." The silence stretched, but neither of us moved. The air between us was charged, humming with something unspoken. Evelyn exhaled slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what this is, but I know that I don't want to ignore it." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I should have stopped this. I should have pulled away, laughed it off, changed the subject. Instead, I stepped closer. Her eyes searched mine, waiting for something, for permission, for reassurance, for a reason to stop. I didn't give her one. And then, she kissed me. It was soft, hesitant, almost fragile, like testing the weight of something before fully stepping into it. I felt her hand tremble against my arm, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I leaned in, deepening the kiss, letting the moment consume us. For the first time since I had arrived at the vineyard, I wasn't thinking. I was just feeling. When we finally broke apart, our foreheads rested together, both of us breathless. The weight of what had just happened settled over us like a quiet storm. She pulled back slightly, her eyes searching mine. "We shouldn't have done that," she whispered. I swallowed hard. Maybe, but neither of us moved. Neither of us walked away, because we both knew the truth. There was no going back. The morning after the kiss, everything felt different. The vineyard was the same. The rolling fields of grapevines stretching out under the soft morning light, the scent of earth and ripe fruit hanging thick in the air. The workers moved about, their voices carrying through the fields, laughter and conversation blending with the distant hum of crickets. But between Evelyn and me, there was nothing but silence. She avoided me, not obviously, not in a way that anyone else would notice, but I noticed. The way she kept herself busy, focusing too intently on her work, speaking to me only when necessary. The warmth in her voice was still there, but it was measured now, controlled. She was trying to pretend, and maybe I was too. I threw myself into work, trying to match her energy, trying to convince myself that what had happened was just a moment. A mistake born from too much wine and too many unspoken emotions. But I knew better, because if it had been a mistake, if it had been something we could forget, it wouldn't still be lingering in every glance, every unspoken word, every breath we stole when the other was too close. I caught myself watching her, noticing the way her hands moved as she inspected the vines, the way she bit her lip when she was deep in thought, the way she hesitated for just a second before speaking to me. She was feeling it too, the weight of it, the pull. And no matter how hard we both tried, it was only a matter of time before we lost the fight. That time came sooner than I expected. That night, after another long day in the fields, I sat alone in my room, the dim glow of the bedside lamp casting flickering shadows against the wooden walls. I was staring at a book I hadn't turned a page in for over an hour, my mind too restless to focus. Then I heard a knock, soft, hesitant. My breath caught in my throat as I stood, crossing the room in a few long strides. I opened the door. Evelyn stood there. Her robe was loosely tied, her damp hair falling over her shoulders in waves. The dim hallway light made her look almost unreal, like something out of a dream I hadn't let myself have until now. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Her lips parted, her breath uneven. Her hands clenched at the fabric of her robe, like she was trying to stop herself from doing what she already knew she would. "Tell me to leave," she whispered. I should have told her that this was wrong, that it couldn't happen again, that we had crossed a line once, and that was already too much. But I didn't. I reached for her instead. And the moment my fingers brushed against her wrist, something between us snapped. She let out a breath she had been holding for too long, stepping inside before I could second-guess what was about to happen. The door clicked shut behind her. And then, she kissed me. There was no hesitation this time. No careful, testing moment of doubt. It was desperate, like she had been holding herself back all day and couldn't stand it anymore. Her hands gripped the front of my shirt, pulling me closer. My fingers tangled in the fabric of her robe, slipping beneath it, feeling the warmth of her skin. The space between us disappeared. Her breath hitched as my hands moved along her spine, the soft gasp that left her lips sending a shiver through me. Every inch of restraint we had built up over the past few weeks was gone, lost in the heat of the moment, in the way our bodies fit together like they had been waiting for this. The world outside didn't exist. There was no vineyard, no responsibilities, no reasons why this shouldn't be happening. There was just her. And I didn't want to stop. I didn't think either of us did. But just as quickly as it started, Evelyn suddenly pulled away. Her breathing was heavy, her eyes wide. Not with regret, but with fear. She stepped back, pressing a hand to her lips as if trying to ground herself. "What are we doing?" she murmured, barely audible. I swallowed hard, my heart still racing. "I don't know." She exhaled sharply, shaking her head as she looked away. This isn't supposed to happen." Maybe she was right. Maybe it wasn't supposed to. But it had. And the way she looked at me, the way she had kissed me, the way she was still standing there instead of leaving. I knew she felt it just as much as I did. I took a slow step forward, reaching for her again. She didn't pull away. I hesitated, giving her the chance to stop me. But she didn't. Her hands found my chest, fingers curling into the fabric of my shirt. And for a moment we just stood there, breathing the same air, feeling the weight of what we had just done, and what we both knew we would do again. She looked up at me, something unreadable in her expression. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. Neither did I. But I knew one thing for certain. We weren't going to stop. The morning sun crept over the vineyard, stretching golden fingers across the rows of vines. The air smelled of damp earth and ripening fruit. Yet there was something different in the way the world felt, as if everything had shifted overnight. I sat on the edge of my bed, running a hand through my hair, my mind a tangled mess of thoughts I couldn't unravel. What had happened last night wasn't a mistake. It wasn't just some fleeting impulse, something that could be excused by too much wine or the intensity of the moment. It was real, and that was the problem. I had been telling myself this whole time that what I felt for Evelyn was admiration, respect, maybe even a deep fondness for the woman who had taken me in and made me feel at home here. But none of that explained the way my body had burned when she touched me. None of it explained the way I had needed her the way I did last night. And now I had to face her. I wasn't sure what to expect as I finally pushed myself off the bed and made my way downstairs. Would she act as though nothing had changed? Would she pretend that last night had been some momentary lapse in judgment? Or worse, would she regret it? The thought twisted my stomach into knots as I stepped outside, the warm morning air washing over me. I found her where I had expected, in the vineyard. She stood between the vines, her fingers brushing absently over the leaves, lost in thought. I hesitated for a long moment, watching her. The way the sunlight caught in her hair, the way her shoulders rose and fell with each slow breath. She must have sensed me because she exhaled softly before turning her head slightly. "We need to talk." Her voice was quiet, but the weight of those words pressed down on me like a stone. I swallowed hard and stepped closer. "Yeah, we do." She didn't turn to face me right away. Instead, she stared out over the endless rows of vines, her fingers trailing over the delicate stems like she was searching for something. Some answer that neither of us had. "Last night," she started, but then she faltered. I could see the way her lips pressed together, the tension in her jaw. She took a breath, steadied herself, and tried again. "I told myself it wouldn't happen again." A dull ache settled in my chest. I nodded, forcing myself to keep my voice even. "And now?" She finally turned to face me then, her gaze meeting mine, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. And then, softly, she admitted, "Now, I don't know what to do." Her voice was raw, honest, and I knew exactly how she felt because I felt it too. She took a step closer, hesitating only slightly before she reached for my hand. I felt my breath hitch as her fingers slid against mine, warm and trembling. She wasn't pulling away. She was letting herself feel this, letting us happen. This, whatever this is between us, it isn't just going to disappear, she murmured. We've tried to ignore it. We've tried to pretend. And look where that got us. She was right. Every step we had taken to fight this, to resist what was growing between us, had only brought us closer, had only made the inevitable that much harder to ignore. I exhaled a shaky breath. "So what do we do?" Her fingers curled around mine, a faint, uncertain smile tugging at her lips. "We stop fighting it." There was no fear in her voice anymore.
No hesitation.
Only acceptance. I reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, letting my fingers linger for just a moment. "Are you sure?" Her expression softened, and I could see it in her eyes. The decision had already been made. "I've never been more sure of anything." She tilted her face up, and before I could think, before I could question whether this was right or wrong, I kissed her. It wasn't desperate like the night before. It was slow, intentional. A kiss that carried the weight of everything we had been holding back for weeks, maybe even months. Her hands found my face, her touch gentle and certain, and I knew in that moment that there was no stopping this. We weren't pretending anymore. We weren't running. We had no idea what the future would hold, how we would navigate the complications, or what consequences we might face. But we weren't letting go. Not this time. And for now, that was enough. The days that followed felt different. Not in the way I had feared. Not with guilt or regret or the awkward tension of a mistake that neither of us knew how to undo. Instead, it felt like something had settled. Like a weight we had both been carrying for too long had finally been put down. Evelyn no longer avoided me. She no longer hesitated before reaching for my hand when no one was looking. She no longer looked at me with fear in her eyes, only certainty. And yet, even with that certainty, the world around us hadn't changed. The vineyard still ran as it always had, workers moving through the fields, shipments being loaded, bottles being labeled. The sun still rose over the hills, warming the land with golden light. But behind closed doors, we were different. We stole moments between meetings, quiet touches in the empty cellar, whispered conversations over glasses of wine long after the rest of the world had gone to sleep. For the first time in weeks, there was no running.
No pretending.
Only us. But even in that warmth, in the dizzying rush of finally giving in, there was a shadow that loomed over us. A question we had yet to face. What happens next? It was Evelyn who finally said it aloud. One evening, as we sat on the porch of her cottage, watching the sky burn with the colors of another setting sun, she turned to me, her expression unreadable. "How long do we have?" Her voice was soft, but the meaning behind the words was heavy. I didn't answer right away, because I knew what she meant. This was real. But was it forever? Could it be? I swallowed hard, choosing my words carefully. "What do you want it to be?" She exhaled slowly, looking down at the wine glass in her hands, turning it absently between her fingers. "I don't know," she admitted. "I never expected this, and I don't know what happens next. I just know I don't want to lose it." A part of me wanted to tell her we didn't have to have all the answers, that for now it was enough just to have each other. But I also knew that wasn't entirely true. We couldn't exist in this bubble forever. At some point, we would have to face the world outside of us. The judgment, the The questions. The consequences. Would people understand? Would they accept it? Would we be strong enough to fight for it? I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. I don't have all the answers either, but I know I'm not ready to walk away from this. Her fingers tightened around mine, her grip steady. Neither am I. And maybe, for now, that was all that mattered. Maybe love wasn't about knowing exactly where you were going. Maybe it was just about choosing to keep going, to take the next step together. She looked up at me then, her expression soft but unwavering. Then let's fight for it. And just like that, I knew. We weren't just something fleeting. We weren't just a summer that would end. We were something worth holding on to, something worth risking everything for. I leaned in, pressing my forehead against hers, letting the warmth of her breath mix with mine. Then let's fight. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we sat there, hands entwined, hearts aligned, knowing that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but also knowing some things are worth the risk. And this was one of them.